So the good folks at Raytheon have just been given $2 billion by the Pentagon to develop new nuclear cruise missiles, I guess for the Air Force, because the Air Force wants to have the capability to launch nuclear missiles from their planes that utilize cutting-edge technology. They don't want any of these old Cold War dinosaurs when they go to nuke whatever country it is that they've decided needs to be turned into a sheet of glass today. And, of course, when millions of Americans are struggling after a year of economic devastation, I couldn't think of a better way to spend $2 billion in taxpayer money than developing new nukes. Because, really, I mean, this whole idea of nuclear disarmament and trying to de-escalate and phase out nuclear weapons and limit nuclear arms, it's not such a big deal as long as we keep making our nuclear bombs better and better. Then we don't need as many of them. So even if we have a smaller number of nukes, who cares? Because, if one nuke is as effective as 10 of the old kind, well, who cares if we have, 5 less total nuclear weapons? And besides, it's not like we plan on using these actual bombs in some sort of real war. At least I hope not. I hope, and it's scary that I have to say this, I hope that everyone recognizes that nuclear war is not like a realistic proposition, in that, if it were ever to come to pass, we would not have a planet left. So it's not really something that you should spend too much time trying to worry about. As long as you have that nuclear deterrent, that's about all that nukes are good for. They're not actually good to use in war, because if you use nukes in war, presumably against another nuclear-armed state, it ends bad for everyone. There's no winning there. And so, as long as the Pentagon actually, has nukes of some kind, which they did, they apparently already had nukes that they could launch from planes. The only reason, really, to spend $2 billion on just developing these new nuclear missiles, which, of course, they will spend many billions actually buying and arming up with these new nuclear missiles once they've completed development, is to pad the pockets of the good folks at Raytheon. And I think that this is a pretty fair assumption, considering that the current Secretary of Defense was, until the time that he was confirmed as the new Secretary of Defense, a board member at Raytheon. And so, frankly, I'm happier knowing that this is probably just corruption and not that that the Pentagon is trying to arm up for a potential nuclear war, and that they're saying, hey, we may actually need to use these nukes one day soon, so we better make sure that our nukes are using cutting-edge technology. So, it's kind of debatable which is worse. I mean, to me, in absolute terms, it's worse to think that they were serious about this and that they really think they need these nukes to fight a war. But, you would, at least in that case, you would assume that they have good intentions and that they're merely misguided, and that these are crazy people who don't realize that nuclear war is bad. And that in that case, then, they would be somewhat persuadable. You could argue with them and try and convince them that, hey, nuclear war is not a good idea, and then maybe they wouldn't spend this money. Whereas, if they're just doing this because they're corrupt and because they're trying to pay off Raytheon, because Raytheon is obviously a very well-connected corporation who makes lots of money off of selling bombs to the U.S. government, well, then they're going to buy these bombs whether they think they need them or not. I mean, constantly we hear about the Department of Defense, how they just blow up old munitions and old planes. As soon as they buy new ones, they blow up the old ones. They use their new weapons. They use their old weapons as target practice to test their new weapons. Famously, I believe they did this with the old B-17 bombers after World War II, which were, a very important piece of World War II history. They were almost all destroyed by the military because they got new bombers that they bought from Boeing and Lockheed after that, and so they didn't need the old ones, and so they just blew them all up and shot them to pieces. And now there's like 1 or 2 B-17s left in the air. And so this is a great way for for these arms companies to continue to keep selling new arms to the military. But, I mean, it really is, it's hard not to feel insulted when they're this in your face about it, to where the Secretary of Defense was literally a sitting board member of a company who just got a $2 billion contract to develop something that we do not need. Because again, even if you want to argue that, hey, it's good to have a nuclear deterrent so that nobody attacks us because they know, hey, we can launch nukes. You only need a couple of nukes for a nuclear deterrent. You only need enough nukes really to blow up the planet once, I think. I would say that's the case. And you only really need one kind of nukes. I mean, if you just had nukes in a silo, out in Wyoming or something, ICBMs in a silo, intercontinental ballistic missiles that you could launch at any time and blow up, your enemy. You really don't need any other kind of nukes. You don't need nukes that you can, fire from submarines. You don't need nukes that you can fire from airplanes. You might want them. It might be, nice to award that contract to your buddies at Raytheon, but you don't need them. And frankly, Raytheon ought to keep in mind they are in the business of death. And so in order to keep their business alive, they need to, yes, they need the U.S. government to keep killing people and to keep bombing people. But if their bombs are so good that they kill literally everyone on the planet, that's not a good thing for them, because then there's nobody left to kill. And if you're in the business of death and everybody's already dead, you're going to go out of business. Even if the executives at Raytheon are let into, the White House bunker, ahead of time because they're told, hey, we're about to launch the nukes. Raytheon CEO, why don't you come stay with me in my bunker? And Lloyd Austin and Joe Biden are there, shoulder to shoulder, packed like sardines into the presidential bunker. It doesn't really benefit him. When he comes out and he opens up and he sees the Capitol wasteland, what's he going to do then? You ever play these Fallout games and you look around and you say, gee, where are all the nuclear arms executives who built the bombs? Anybody ever wonder that? Anybody ever wonder what happened to them? So really nobody benefits from this deal, not even Raytheon in the long term. Oh, and before I forget, I should state that Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, did promise to recuse himself from all dealings with Raytheon at the Pentagon. So we know that this, I should correct myself, this has nothing to do with him being a board member at Raytheon. He is not a paid shill. He is not just handing out billions of dollars to his employer. That's not what Lloyd Austin is doing at all. No, this was made independently. The Air Force said, hey, we need these nuclear missiles that we can fire from B-52s or whatever it is, the plane that they want to fire them from. And they said, you know what, Raytheon, these are the guys for the job, which, they probably are, because when you're a highly well-connected corporation like Raytheon, who has a steady base of clientele, and your only client really is the U.S. government, there's not a lot of competition there because you've got the market cornered. You are in bed with the Pentagon. Raytheon is essentially an arm of the Pentagon anyway. So even if the Secretary of Defense wasn't a literal paid Raytheon shill, there are so many other paid Raytheon shills in the Pentagon, infested with the the Pentagon. They would have gotten the contract anyway. It's kind of like a reverse of the situation of when I talk about these social media companies. They are essentially CIA cutouts because they're so thoroughly infested with the CIA and spew CIA talking points, yet they're technically not, run by the CIA. That's why they're a cutout. Raytheon, depending on how you want to look at it, is a Pentagon cutout. Raytheon's, almost exclusively funded by the Pentagon. And even when Raytheon deals with other countries, they need the Pentagon's approval. So, is it really fair to talk about, Raytheon's influence over the Pentagon, or is it, is it the tail wagging the dog? We don't know. When you live under a corporatist system like this, it becomes very difficult to distinguish between certain government agencies and certain supposedly private corporate entities. But no matter how you slice it, everyone involved here is a dirtbag who I really struggle to understand how they sleep at night. Everyone, whether they work at Raytheon or Lockheed or Boeing or in the Pentagon itself, they're all bilking the American people either through taxation or inflation, or just straight on inflation isn't even necessarily the right word. Cantillon redistribution via money production. Either way, it is stolen wealth that they sap away from ordinary Americans and from the real private sector. The people who are in the business of not murdering people across the planet or in the Middle East or in Latin America or whatever. All of that wealth that goes into the Pentagon still has to be sucked off of the American economy and off the backs of people who actually produce real goods. And all of that is just to benefit of an absolutely minuscule group of people. Folks who work at the Pentagon, folks who work at Raytheon, folks who work at Lockheed, Boeing, all these other government contractors. There's a whole litany of these companies, supposedly private sector companies, whose only contractor or whose only client is the Defense Department. And just so these folks can have a job and make billions of dollars, our productive capacity in this country gets sapped away, and people across the rest of the world literally get blown to pieces. And so when I look at it that way, is it possible to imagine a more demonic enterprise than the U.S. Department of Defense and defense industry? Because not only do you have to think about all the people who would be alive if not for the Pentagon looking for more excuses to ask for budget increases, and having to buy new bombs at the behest of their buddies at Raytheon. They essentially have so many bombs that they're swimming in. They have to throw them out of the plane, unload them, and bomb somebody so that they have an excuse to buy more bombs. But anyway, even you have to consider not just all the people who they kill doing that, but all of the wealth that is sapped away from the American people, and what all of that productive capacity could have been put toward. What sort of real peaceful ends could have been achieved if not for all of this waste and all of this just evil that's been perpetrated over the past few decades. How much richer would the marginal American be if they didn't have this tumor just sucking their life away? How many more folks who are in poverty now wouldn't be in poverty? How many great scientific minds who work, inventing and producing these instruments of death could have put their intellect to work developing things that actually help American society and the world? Because it's not just the scene, as wasn't it Bastiat scene? Oh no, not Bastiat. It was Hazlitt. His phrase was the seen and the unseen, or maybe it was Bastiat. I always get them confused. They're kind of similar guys in my mind. But it's not just the scene of all the people who were murdered, which is the biggest problem, obviously. I mean, that's the worst thing. But there's all the unseen consequences of everything that we had to sacrifice in order to enable all of this killing that has been perpetrated by the Pentagon. And this new Raytheon contract is just another mile marker down that path. Or maybe even mile marker is too strong of a word, because this doesn't mark much of any sort of change. I mean, it's more just a blip on the radar. So with that said, I guess that about sums all this situation up. And I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.